all natural growers. Today's episode is going to be all about making compost and worm teas, aerated teas specifically. I'm going to be talking all about the soil biology, the different ingredients that I use and other people use, and the effects that has on the tea and has on your plants. We're going to take a deep dive into how these teas work and how to make them. And I hope that I'm able to give you guys a good understanding of what's going on inside of these teas and why they're so beneficial. Using these teas is a way to dramatically increase the health of your plants, the nutrition content, the root structure, basically everything involved in the plant's process, because you're basically giving your plants a huge micronutrient, vitamin and mineral boost and probiotics. So it's just like a huge boost to the immune system of the plants, which allows it to produce healthier, better tasting fruit and resist pests and disease way better. So I'm really excited to share this information with you guys. I'll be posting all of the parts and products that I'm using in the description so that you guys can find them or find something similar. And all of my video descriptions and every single one of my videos, I always put relevant information, links to website or articles that you may find useful, and even other YouTube videos that may help give you a better perspective or show another way to build or create the same thing. So always check out my videos descriptions. I try to pack a lot of good information in there for you guys, especially on this episode. I'll have a lot of different things and links of websites I like that have good recipes for teas. All right, so let's get into it. Let's see how I make my teas and the equipment that I use and all the nutrients. Compost or worm tea, when I refer to those, I'm specifically talking about an aerated aerobic tea. So what we do is pump as much oxygen into this water as possible to create an environment that really proliferates the bacteria that we want. So by proliferating these beneficial microbes and fungi, we're then taking that and spraying it on the leaves of our plants, and we can even drench the soil with it. You can kind of think of this as like a probiotic for the soil. And there's a direct parallel with the microflora in the soil to the microflora in our actual gut, because when we eat fresh fruits and vegetables that haven't been washed in chlorine water, that actually have the microbiology on there, we ingest that and it becomes part of us and creates a healthy gut biome for us. So there's a direct relationship to the soil, to us, to our skin. There's microbes and fungi all over this planet, even in places we didn't know were possible to exist. Now, all of these microbes, the fungi, the micro and macro arthropods, the nematodes, all of these different creatures living in the soil universe responsible for breaking down sand, silt, and clay, and the different micronutrients and minerals and all these different things, death of their bodies and excretions. All of these things create soil health, feeding the trillions of organisms. These organisms are also directly responsible for communication with the plant. And the plant will actually send requests for specific nutrients, and they've done scientific studies proving this, where the plant will request a certain nutrient and they will put out what's called an exudate, and that is a carbohydrate or sugar exuded through the roots, which is a food source. And Elaine likes to call these exudates cookies and candy. So it's just like the really delicious, these things that the microbes love to feed on. So in exchange for getting those exudate sugars, they return a specific nutrient or nutrients to the roots, where it becomes available for the plants. There's this constant marketplace and exchange going on underneath the soil. By trying to increase the health of the soil biology, we're allowing nature to do its work and convert the soil for us. It will create the best pH. It will break down the minerals and nutrients, making them available for the plants. Increasing the organic matter will allow for much more moisture retention, even pulling in the early morning dew and sucking that into the ground. So the better your soil biology, the higher the organic matter in your soil. All of these things contribute to healthier plants and healthier humans, and basically eliminates the need for adding much in the way of inputs and reduces reliance on pesticides or herbicides or these other things. So these teas are a very cheap but extremely effective way to add both fertility, to add immunity, and more nutrition to your plants. So also in these teas, depending on the ingredients that you're using, you can make these a more fungal tea or a more bacterial tea. So if you look at the succession order of plants, if you start with just an open bare lot of field, what will happen is you'll start with some of these pioneer species weeds, these ones that need hardly any nutrients, hardly any water, are bacterial dominated. You go into a forest, the soil will be more dominated by fungal life. So this is a concept that we need to understand. Because as you go from those smaller weeds, go kind of into brassicas, and then some of your other vegetables and berries, then eventually fruit trees and nut trees and larger trees until you get to the old growth forest. So all ecosystems are going through this succession where all life is trying to reach these higher levels of adaptation and strength. You know, so like the Amazon rainforest or Yosemite or Yellowstone, these are examples of old growth forests that have been there for hundreds or thousands of years. They're highly developed ecosystems. So we are at the beginning stages of that if we are a farm, especially on bare land. So typically our soil will be more bacterial dominated, and we want it to be because we're growing vegetables. But since the soil is more bacterial dominated, we actually want to make teas that are slightly more fungal dominated so that it kind of creates more of a balance. We also want to introduce a lot of fungal life to our soil because it is so vital to the connecting network that connects all of the microbes and the root systems and all of the soil life together. It's responsible for transportation of nutrients and water and different things. That is something we must have in our soils, and it's usually absent. And I'll be talking about that in a minute, how I make it more fungal. You also can add nutrients through teas through what's called foliar feeding. And all of your plants on their leaves, they can absorb nutrients through their leaves through these very interesting and complicated mechanisms. An example of this would be when it rains. So when it rains, everybody knows that the plants get greener. Well, most people assume, and I used to assume, that it was just from the water, just getting that fresh rainwater, it was just so good for the plant. Well, in reality, there's nitrogen in the rain itself. And that is what contributes to the greener appearance of the plant after a rain. So that's just evidence of plants being able to absorb nutrients through their leaves. The main kind of focus of making a compost or worm tea is getting the bacteria and fungal microbial life. But you know, when you're adding in fish fertilizers, worm castings, then you're raising the NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium levels. And those are the feeding nutrients, the macronutrients that plants need to create a lot of greenery and produce their fruit and flowers and all of that. So depending on the ratios of your ingredients, you can make it more of just kind of like a maintenance spray. You can make a fertilizer spray. You can make one that might have more of an effect, bad fungal life or on insects. So there's a lot of different techniques and ways to do this. You know, it's still a growing field as well. So there's still a lot more to learn and to develop in this world as well. Okay guys, so let's go look at the nutrients. I'm going to show you exactly how I make it. Here are the nutrients I use and why I use them. So the first ingredient, some azomite. And azomite, you guys have heard me talk about it a million times. It's just a rock dust from a volcanic deposit. There's many rock dusts from different places, and this is just one of the name brands. Azomite is a good fungal and bacterial food. It also contains, I think it's about 70 different trace minerals. Now, plants don't need all 70 of those, but soil biology and fungi will be able to either use those or convert those in some way. So that's why I want to have it all available to the plants and the soil biology. With all of my ingredients, I want to dilute all of them first and then add them into my water here. So since my first ingredient will be azomite, I'm going to add that in. And I'm going to continue to fill up this trash can here. So the first dilution is just the azomite. And now that's all diluted in there, and it's going to continue to fill up with water. Something else very important to mention. This water is connected to a hose that is connected to a Boogie Brew filter. I'll post a link in the description to this product, but this is the Boogie Blue Plus filter that filters out chlorine and chloramine. And the reason we want to filter out chlorine and especially chloramine is so that it's not killing the biology that we're putting in the water. Chlorine is put in all city water to kill any pathogens and things that could make us sick. But we just need to know that and take it out. So this filter does a pretty good job. It's not going to get it all out. What also eliminates chlorine is letting the water stand for 24 hours. If you put water in a bucket, let it sit there for 24 hours, it actually will off gas into the atmosphere. So that's one way to get rid of it. Another way to more quickly get rid of it is to put the water in a trash can and to aerate it. The aeration, I think within a couple hours, the chlorine is gone and is now safe to use, and it's not gonna kill your biology. So I kind of do a combination of that. As I'm making all my ingredients, I'm aerating it the whole time. And then I have my Boogie Brew to help prevent keeping a lot of those bad chemicals out. Okay, the next ingredient, let's take a look at. This is a vitamin C product. They're a great company. And this is a seaweed and fish food. And you'll notice it's a 3-2-2. And if you don't know, these are the concentration numbers of a fertilizer. So the first number is N, nitrogen. The second is P, phosphorus. The third is K, potassium. So if I want to make a fertilizing dose, I would put in much more of this stuff, like maybe a quarter cup or up to half a cup in my 20 gallons. But since I'm just going to do a maintenance spray, I'll just basically do a capful. So let's put a small amount. This small amount is just to feed the microbes and fungi, to give them extra food. And this is really great food. It's also got micronutrients as well from the kelp. So next I'll dilute that. You know, there's some measuring involved in making these teas. It's not too complex. It doesn't need to be super exact. All right, so I've also got some kelp meal, you know, usually a handful or two when I'm adding compost to my beds or making soil blocks. So kelp is just a wonderful soil food web food. And this is pretty fine grained. And I like that just because it can dissolve in the water really well. And I'll just toss that into the water. I'll probably put like a quarter cup in there. I'm just putting small amounts of everything. Kelp meal, when it's broken down, turns into a lot of great chemicals that plants really need and love. Now it's time to talk about another very important piece of making teas, and that is aeration. So for aeration, I am using some fish stones that they have these small little pumps down here that suck in air. They pump the air through these stones, making a lot of bubbles. This is used for aquariums. They're cheap. And I used to use this for my aquaponics system back in the day. So I've just repurposed it. I want to show you guys how to make a more legit way to do this. This is actually not recommended by Elaine Ingham because she just feels that there's, you know, if you did have some bad microbes, they could hide out in here and then enter your tea. But it's not that big of a concern because we're super oxygenating this, and any bad microbes are just going to get completely destroyed by all the good microbes that we're adding. I am going to upgrade this soon, so I'm going to put out a video about how to make a legit system. I'll put a link to the type of pump that I think is good to use depending on the size bucket that you're making of tea, and you want anywhere from like 20 to 60 watts for an air pump. And so I'll show you guys how to do that soon. And you use an air pump and pump all the air through PVC with holes in it. It's just a way cleaner and safer, better way that pumps a ton of oxygen in there. But for now, this works well, and this is safe. I always check all my samples under my microscope to identify the different protozoa and bacteria and make sure there's enough fungal life in there and make sure that it is aerobic. But the number one rule to know if something's aerobic or anaerobic is the smell. This tea should always smell neutral. So I'm gonna go ahead and just put the air stones in. So those guys add a bunch of bubbles, but you should have even more aeration than that. This works well for me, but to make it even better and safer, you should have a little bit more aeration, which is why I've added this. All this is my mom's old pump. She used to use this for, she had a little fountain. So this is another way. This is actually, it's kind of a similar concept to what's called a vortex brewer. This is a way simplified version of it. So basically what this is gonna do is add oxygen by breaking the surface of the water. So whenever you break the surface of water, there's actual oxygen going in there and exchanging. So what I've done is I just rigged that pump up to some 1/2 inch. So by having this break the surface of the water, it's shooting pretty hard. It's adding a lot of oxygen, and then it's also sucking from the bottom any stuff at the bottom, and it's pumping it through to the top, and then it's swirling it around. And that is just allowing everything to mix well, allowing the microbes access to everything, getting things into finer, smaller particles that they can better feed on. But I'm gonna show you guys in the future how to build a really legit air setup. So look forward to that. But these are some really cheap ways to do it. I just had these things laying around and it didn't cost me anything, right? You guys know I'm all about doing things cheap and saving money, but I would like to make that better setup, so stay tuned. Okay, so now back to this is our fish emulsion and seaweed that we diluted. Let's toss that in. So the next thing that we're gonna make is some humic acid. And this is from a raw. So humic acid is a really good fungal food. And what humic acid is, or fulvic acid, these are organic acids produced sort of at the end of the decomposition process. So at the end of your compost pile, once it's turned into actual soil, it has these really special acids in them. It's kind of like the final form of organic matter. It's very potent, and fungal life loves it. So I got this stuff to try it out to try to increase the fungal life of my teas, which it has done. And I'm going to show you guys in a second how to make your own humic acid for free, just from compost and worm castings. Okay, but for this though, we're going to dilute it. And for my 20-gallon batch, I determined that a 1 teaspoon was a half batch. So I always make a half batch of this raw stuff, and then I make my own humic acids as well. When I run out of this though, I'm just going to continue to make my own natural humic acids for my own compost and worm castings, because I find that works pretty well. I'm just diluting this with like a gallon of water. So now the next step, we're going to make our own humic acids. So you can actually make it from compost, because of course there's humic acid in compost, but it's kind of locked inside the soil. But there's a really easy way to get it out, and I learned this from, of course, Dr. Elaine Ingham. So you just take a little bit of compost. I just put it in a burlap bag like this, and I take it, and then I'm just putting a bucket on top of a bucket here, and then I just run water over the compost. I don't massage it, I just run water over it. And you'll be able to see that the water, it's probably hard to see, but the water is a little brown. And the brown color, those are full of humic acids. So, or like whenever you've overwatered your compost and a bunch of that brown water comes out, that's leaking away humic acids and other things. So I'm just gonna get a little bit out of here. Trash can's almost full, so I don't wanna add too much more stuff. So then this, I'll just throw back into that compost pile, and then I can use it. And you can see the water is pretty brown. So you can also do the same process with worm castings as well. Worm castings are also famous for having a lot of fulvic acid, which is also another super important organic compound to have in your soil and in your teas. Okay, so now we need the final ingredient, guys. We need the actual tea bag that's going to be filled with worm castings and compost. Since I make all my own compost and worm castings, I always make a blend for my tea bags, and I always want to have as much microbiology and diversity in my teas as possible. So that's why I do it like this. So for the tea bag, what I now use, which is so great, is it's called a 5-gallon paint strainer. You can get it at any big box store. I'll put a link in the description for Amazon. And basically it's just something like this, and it lasts a while. You can use it for mini batches, so they're pretty durable and last a long time. They're great because you can just put the paint strainer over a 5-gallon bucket, and then we're gonna go collect our compost and worm castings. So you wanna have about 1.5 to 2 pounds of compost or worm castings per 5 gallons. So for my 20-gallon, that means I put about 8 pounds in there. And I never measure this or weigh this. It doesn't have to be perfect. Come somewhere close to that. I did weigh it my first time to kind of get a feel for it. So making a smaller concentration, let's say you use a less amount of compost or worm castings, it's not going to hurt anything. It may not be as potent as you might like it to be, but it's not going to hurt anything. You know, if you put 20 pounds of compost in there, it would be too strong, and you might nitrogen burn your plants. Especially if you have a lot of worm castings too, and you're putting in other things like fish that are high in nitrogen. So you just want to kind of analyze what the ingredients that you're using. But honestly, as long as you're diluting, it is really hard to burn something using these teas. I have never done it personally. I never hear about people doing it. And you can always spray something first and see how it reacts before you spray the rest of your crops. But in general, as long as you're staying close to these ratios that I'm telling you, and you're taking into account the other amounts of maybe fish or hydrolytes that you're putting in there, things that are high in nitrogen, then everything's gonna be fine, don't worry. So next I'm gonna put in my castings. So like I said, I don't measure. I'm trying to get 7 to 8 pounds of total material. All right, and that feels about right. So this is our tea bag, and these paint strainers are great. They can hold a lot of weight and not tear or have any problems. It's pretty cool. This is how I like to tie them up. Okay, so the first thing I do, I just put like a little knot in the bag. This is really easy to get out later, so it's not a big deal. This is some string just from my straw bales. I love keeping those because I always find a use for them. Go, just put a real loose knot on there. Then I'll go around horizontally, wrap it around. So this is what I'm left with. And then you see how it doesn't fall apart. And this has a knot on it, so it's totally good to go. So now I just put it in the water. Then I have a tree that I hang it on. And then what you want to do is just kind of dunk it in and out. It's going to cause water to get in there and get all of the material soaked in water and start mixing it. You could come and do that, you know, once a day if you really wanted to. Because I have this pipe here shooting water, it's going to cause a really good mixing. Or if you have really good bubbles, that causes a great mixing of the compost and worm castings. So now I've got this just extreme amount of diversity going on in here. Tons of different food for the microbes as well. So my last step, guys, I'm just going to cover this. I just have the lid here. And then the lid just keeps things from falling in there. So something else I really want to stress, let's say you don't have a microscope and you can't analyze your sample. One way to know if it is safe to use, it should smell completely neutral. It shouldn't have any anaerobic, poopy, manure-y, gross smell whatsoever. If it does, don't spray that or water it in on your plants. You might be able to water it in, actually, that would be safe, but I would not spray it on your plants. It's potential there's something bad in there. It went anaerobic probably because you're not oxygenating it enough, or the other main thing you need to make sure that this tea bag is free hanging in here. You don't want the tea bag hanging on the ground. If it's on the ground, that bottom layer is not going to be oxygenated and it's going to go anaerobic and start to stink. So always keep the tea bag elevated in the air. And after the tea is brewed, get it on your hands, smell your hands. It should smell neutral, maybe slightly earthy or woody, almost no smell. Now, if you've added fish or seaweed, you may also smell some fish or seaweed smell, but it would not smell like a rotten fish. It just smells like a fresh piece of fish. So that's what we want to be smelling and looking for. And then the next level is to actually analyze your teas under a microscope, and then you really know exactly what's going on. In a future video, I will be showing you guys my microscope and how I use it, and we'll look at some samples together. So I'm really excited to show you guys that going into the future. All right, and then that is it. Now it's gonna sit. I wanna let it brew for 24 to 48 hours. That's kind of the time window that you wanna use it in. You could use it after 72 hours, but it's better to use it more in that 24 to 48 window. That's when the biology is gonna be the best. Now, one thing, if you've ever made teas before or read about teas, you've probably heard people say that you should add molasses. I used to add molasses, but after learning more about soil biology and the different things people are currently doing, I now typically don't use it unless I want a certain effect. If I want it to be a more bacterial dominated tea, then I would want to add molasses. You can also add other types of sugar as well to help feed those microbes. After making my teas with this, without using the molasses, I found that I have plenty of bacteria development in my teas, so I don't really need it. And I'd rather not put in something that can feed potentially dangerous bacteria. That's not to say that putting molasses in is a dangerous method, but it is possible that, let's say you did have E. coli, well, the E. coli will feed on this, and then you're speeding up the process. But because we have our systems here and our air pumps, keeping everything really aerobic, then the potential of that is basically zero. So sometimes when I do use the molasses, it's when I want more of like a probiotic effect on the leaves, where they'll be little soldiers for you, fighting off the bad bacteria or fungal problems if they get on the leaf. So there's just more benefits to using teas. So I'm not against using molasses, but I personally don't use it anymore. Dr. Elaine Ingham doesn't use it or recommend using it. So it's for specific situations, and I've just found that out myself through using my microscope and seeing what's going on in the tea and what's really working. So that's my recommendation. But if you want to use the molasses, you're safe to do so. I just want to push my soils to be more balanced between fungi and bacterial growth, and I want to really put a lot of fungal hyphae into my ground so that's creating really diverse fungal networks that will really benefit my plants. Also, mycorrhizae, that's another possible thing you could add to the compost to help increase fungal growth. That's one I haven't tried, but I know that's a great one that a lot of people use. So there's another recommendation for you guys. And I'd also like to stress that the formula that I'm showing you guys is one that I'm using and doing. You can subtract or add these nutrients in different amounts. You could just put only compost in the tea bag and put it in water and aerate it, and that would be a compost tea. It would just have far less microbes, far less diversity of microbes, far less diversity of nutrients, and all of those things, but it would still be good. So just do the best that you can. And if you only have a couple of these items or you don't want to spend the extra money, don't worry about it. I would say first start with making your own compost and worm castings. Just aerating that alone by itself is wonderful and would create a lot of benefit for you. Now, if you want to start adding in all these different other fungal and microbial foods and nutrients, that's also great too. But just know that you can do this more simply. You can also do it in a 5-gallon bucket. Don't limit yourself thinking it's too complex because of what I showed you. Just know you can do a much more simplified version of this. So I just really want to encourage you guys to get started making this type of stuff and learning about it, because it's just done wonders for my garden and farm. And like I said, I really believe this is the future of organic nutrients and addressing of maybe like IPM, integrated pest management. This is the way that in the future, we will address pest and disease issues with actual biology that's indigenous to our own areas, our own microclimates.